March 6, 1944, 27,000 feet above Brandenburg, Germany. The contrails stretch white against the pale morning sky, geometric lines drawn by American B-17 bombers droning toward Berlin. Oberleutnant Klaus Hartmann pulls his Focke-Wulf 190 into a climbing turn, squinting through his canopy at the formations ahead. This is the moment he is trained for, the moment German fighter doctrine has perfected over 4 years of air war. The bombers are still 200 kilometers from Berlin, far beyond the range of their escort fighters. The American Thunderbolts and Lightnings have already turned back, their fuel gauges forcing them home, as they always do. Now the flying fortresses are alone, and Hartmann's squadron will tear into them like wolves into sheep. He checks his ammunition count, flexes his fingers on the control stick, and begins his attack run. This is certainty. This is mathematics. This is how every bomber raid has ended since 1943. Then his wingman's voice crackles through the radio, tight with confusion. Achtung, fighters at 10 o'clock high. What are those? Hartmann's head snaps left. There, impossibly, a formation of sleek single-engine fighters rides above the bomber stream, their long noses and distinctive bubble canopies catching the winter light. They are still there. They are escorting. They have followed the bombers all the way from the Dutch coast, and they show no signs of turning back. Hartmann knows every Allied fighter's range by heart. He has studied the charts, memorized the numbers, based his tactics on those immutable facts. But these aircraft are defying facts. They are where they cannot be. The German Luftwaffe had built its defensive strategy on a simple geographical truth. Bombers needed fighter escort to survive, and fighters could not fly from England to Berlin and back. Physics forbade it. Fuel capacity forbade it. The math was absolute. British Spitfires could barely reach the French coast. American P-47 Thunderbolts, even with drop tanks, turned back over the Ruhr Valley. This created a sanctuary zone, a killing ground hundreds of kilometers deep where German fighters operated with impunity, where they could attack in formation, take their time, select their targets with the precision of craftsmen. German pilots had grown accustomed to the rhythm. Wait for the escorts to leave, then attack. The Americans came like clockwork to their slaughter, offering their bombers undefended to Germany's finest aviators. The P-51 Mustang was not supposed to exist. It had been designed by North American Aviation in 1940 as a fighter for Britain, built in 117 days because the British were desperate and the Americans were ambitious. Its original Allison engine made it mediocre, unremarkable, just another fighter in a crowded sky. But in late 1942, someone had the idea to mate the American airframe with a British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine built under license by Packard. The result was aerodynamic alchemy. The Mustang became a fighter that could dogfight with anything the Luftwaffe flew and could do it over Berlin, 900 kilometers from its English bases, with fuel to spare for the return journey. German intelligence had dismissed early reports of the Mustang's range. The numbers made no sense. A single-engine fighter carrying that much fuel should be too heavy to maneuver, too sluggish to fight. The Americans must be exaggerating, or their pilots were on suicide missions. But by March 1944, the truth could no longer be denied. The Mustangs were everywhere. They shepherded the bombers to the target, they fought over the city itself, and then, most galling of all, they stayed to strafe airfields on the way home, burning German fighters on the ground, with ammunition they still had left after flying for 4 hours. Hartmann's first engagement with a Mustang lasts 45 seconds. The American pilot fights with aggressive confidence, rolling and climbing with an energy that seems impossible for an aircraft that has already been airborne for 3 hours. When Hartmann tries to dive away, the standard escape tactic against the shorter-ranged escorts, the Mustang follows him down, still has speed to spare, still has altitude to trade. Hartmann barely makes it to cloud cover. His hands are shaking on the stick. This is not how it is supposed to work. The Americans should be conserving fuel, flying cautiously, worried about their gauges. Instead, they fight like they have all the fuel in the world. Because they do. In the debriefing rooms of Luftwaffe bases across Germany, the reports accumulate through March and April of 1944. The language is clinical, but the desperation bleeds through. Enemy escort maintained contact for entirety of mission. American fighters observed over target area. Unable to press attack due to persistent escort presence. One squadron commander writes with barely controlled fury, We have lost the advantage of geography. The enemy brings his airfields with him in the form of fuel tanks. The drop tank, that simple metal container of aviation gasoline hung under the Mustang's wings and belly, represented something profoundly American. It was an elegant, unsophisticated, a crude solution to a complex problem. German engineers had studied drop tanks and found them wanting. They leaked, they affected aerodynamics, they offended the principles of pure design. But American doctrine embraced them, manufactured them by the thousands, treated them as expendable as ammunition. The Mustang pilots dropped them before combat, littering European skies with aluminum containers, each one a symbol of industrial abundance so vast it could throw away fuel tanks like confetti. What haunted German pilots was not just the Mustang's presence, but what that presence revealed. The Americans had solved the unsolvable problem through sheer material wealth and engineering pragmatism. They had not built a better fighter. They had built a fighter with longer reach, had given it the fuel to escort bombers to any target in the Reich, and had produced so many of them that the sky over Germany turned silver with their numbers. By summer 1944, the Luftwaffe was losing its experienced pilots faster than it could train replacements, not because German fighters were inferior, but because they could never catch the bombers alone anymore. The sound that marked the end of German air superiority was not the roar of engines or the rattle of guns. It was the silence after the bombers passed, the absence of the firing, the killing, the victories German pilots had come to expect. The Mustangs had stolen the sanctuary of distance. Hartmann survived the war, flew until the fuel ran out in April 1945. In his memoir, he returns again and again to that March morning, to the moment he saw the Escort still there over Brandenburg. He writes, "We knew then that we had lost. Not the battle, we would fight many more battles, but we had lost the mathematics of survival. They could reach us anywhere, and we could not hide in distance anymore." And that realization lived the essence of American warfare. Not the most elegant solution, but the most abundant one. Not the purest design, but the one with fuel enough to reach Berlin and still fight on the way home. The sky belonged to those who could afford to fill it.